Everyone. How are you doing today? It's a lovely afternoon. Just straighten the tie there. Lovely afternoon. I thought I would just hop on. Happy Labor Day. Today is Labor Day. Most countries it's on May 1st, but today in the United States it's in September. And I thought I would just do a surprise afternoon live, talk with everyone, see how they're doing. And basically, rather than give you just an introductory spiel in which I ramble about current events or politics or something like that, I thought I would read to you all from the introduction to an oldie but goodie, Getting Rich Without Capitalism, my book. I'm going to read to you some from the introduction of that book. I have unnamed diet beverage right here. Just opened it and I'm pouring it into my glass. I know folks are piling in, and it's good. Tweet this out, bring people on board. The next couple hours, we'll just be on here chatting. I'm going to read to you from Getting Rich Without Capitalism, the classic. From there, I'll answer your super chats. We'll do our roll call, our whatever we want to call it. I call you out as I see you. I give a shout out to everyone who's here, names and locations. And then from there, I'll answer your super chats. So if you haven't already done so, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, post this on Reddit, post this on Facebook, post this on Twitter. This will be fun. This will be fun. This will be fun. Unnamed diet beverage, just waiting for that fizz to go down, right? You don't want to be a big, top like, right? You want to pour it carefully. You can't pour it all at once. But now it seems to be fizzled down enough that I can drink some of it. And I think I'm just going to give you a dramatic reading from my book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism. I'm going to read to you from the introduction to this book. As you can see on the cover, I put the Chinese high-speed rail, the fastest trains in the world. Thought that might be a fun thing to put on the cover of the book. It's called Getting Rich Without Capitalism, America's Way Out. All right, folks, I'm going to read to you. Almost all people have some desire to be rich. That's why so many people play the lottery. That's why reality TV shows portraying the lives of wealthy people are so popular. There's nothing wrong with aspiring to become wealthy. To be wealthy means a huge level of safety. Rich people don't have to worry about losing their jobs, their homes, or whether or not they can pay their bills. Rich people have time to pursue their own dreams and aspirations without being chained to a desk or an assembly line, toiling away, selling their time to a boss. In the world that we live in, wealth means power. Those who want to do good in the world and try to change things for the better often wish they had a huge pile of cash to pour into their noble efforts. Nobody wants to be poor. Poverty is a state of being defined by deprivation. Poor people are without quality living conditions. To be poor often means lacking access to basic services like healthcare and education. Around the world, to be poor often means to be malnourished, and even for those who are not malnourished, their access to food is below basic standards. The U.S. Department of Agriculture keeps track of food insecurity and says that at this point, even in the USA, supposedly the richest country in the world, 41.2 million people, including 6.5 million children, are food insecure. Many young Americans get deep into debt paying for their education, hoping that with that degree they can get a better job and be more financially stable. Have you read or watched The Expanse yet? And if so, what are your thoughts? I have not watched that The Expanse. I haven't seen it, so I just can't give you my thoughts on something I haven't seen. But I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer to that, but I've never watched it. All right. Where were we? Many working class Americans diligently save their money or invest it in the stock market, hoping that they can have a shot at getting ahead and living a life of luxury and security. Things aren't going too well in America these days. If you walk through neighborhoods in Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Chicago, or other industrial cities in the U.S. heartland, you will see many empty, foreclosed homes. The next generation of Americans are dealing with the fact that they will not have the standard of living that their parents once had. The good-paying industrial jobs are gone, and even the retail jobs are starting to dry up as big box stores close down. As the income of Americans drops, Walmart is being replaced by Dollar General. The decline of the American standard of living isn't just causing us to tighten our belts. Along with it come a whole new layer of societal problems. Young people, stuck in low-wage jobs, living with their parents, are turning to drugs. Opioid deaths are rising to epidemic levels. The humiliation and shame, the stress and fear, the insecurity experienced by so many young Americans is most certainly playing a role in the rising number of mass shootings and suicides. To not be able to support oneself, to be deprived of the ability to have your own home, your own life, and start your own family is destroying the mental health of millions. Under such circumstances, it is no wonder that shows like Real Housewives of New Jersey or Rags to Riches are so popular. Plans for getting rich, or more accurately, finding a way out of poverty and decay, isn't just an afternoon fantasy or daydream. It's a matter of burning urgency. No one wants to have their life turned in to another statistic. No one wants to feel like they failed in life. While things are going badly for millions of Americans, some people are getting rich. Perhaps the best way to describe it is getting richer, because these folks were pretty well off to begin with. I'm talking about the payday lenders, who take advantage of people living paycheck to paycheck and figure out ways to suck even more money out of those who are already struggling to get by. I'm talking about the pharmaceutical corporations that consciously push doctors to overprescribe opioids and get people hooked. I'm talking about the fat cats who own the steel companies and auto giants and close down their factories in the United States, shipping jobs to countries where they can get away with paying lower wages. I'm talking about the prison contractors who see crime and mass incarceration as a way to make bigger profits. I'm talking about the corporations and companies that lay off their hardworking employees who get paid minimum wage and replace them with criminals who have been convicted and work for pennies an hour inside the prison system. I'm talking about the corporations that get paid to make bombs, drones, tanks, and weapons of mass destruction. The CEOs who are sending sons and daughters from the American heartland to the Middle East as a great business opportunity. The problem with these people isn't that they are getting rich. These people were already rich, and right now they are getting rich by making the rest of the world poor. There's no reason for the people of America to get poorer. Oil and natural gas are the most valuable resources in the world, and we have plenty of them in America. Right now, we are producing more oil and natural gas than ever before. America is actually the top natural gas producer and third in oil. Despite the huge boom in natural resources and energy production, we are just getting poorer. The people getting rich from the oil, natural gas, and coal beneath our feet have names like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, Rothschild, and DuPont. The same clique of international bankers that are getting us into wars and signing us up for crooked, job-killing trade deals are getting rich from our natural resources. On election day, the candidates these billionaires put up, Republicans or Democrats, will talk to us about how they love God and country. But how patriotic can they be when they are grinding the working families of this country into greater poverty while they set up a global financial dictatorship? The only God these people worship is money. Cutting taxes, liberalizing the market isn't going to help you or me. The policies pushed by the two major parties are making these bloodsuckers even more rich, while making the rest of us even poorer than before. But imagine that things were different. Imagine the profits of America's booming oil and natural gas resources were going into the public treasury. The money could be used to build high-speed railways, connecting the heartland of America to the coasts. This money could be used to refurbish our university system. So once again, we were churning out the smartest engineers and scientists in the world, making huge profits from scientific breakthroughs like fusion energy and artificial intelligence. We could assemble the smartest technicians, architects, and visionaries to create a 5-year plan and completely remake the United States of America from top to bottom, with the money now being wasted on foreign wars, corporate bailouts, tax credits, and foreign aid to criminal regimes. We could dispatch a brain trust to directly, tightly organize the population in order to build a new America. Imagine every unemployed American between the age of 18 and 30 being hired into an army of American rebirth. This army of young people could be dispatched across the country in bright green uniforms to rebuild our crumbling water systems, refurnish our schools and hospitals, pave new highways, build new storm levees, and construct new efficient power plants, all while getting paid a decent wage in order to do it. Beyond this, imagine that the steel mills and auto factories were hiring once again, and it was guaranteed they wouldn't be moved overseas because these vital industries were owned by the American people and operated to serve public good. The wages of auto workers and steel workers would be carefully regulated by law, as would the price of steel and American-made cars. Imagine the banks giving subsidies and loans to young Americans to start their own companies, launch high-tech startups, and design their own innovative business models. Instead of banks ripping off working families with predatory loans or wrecking small businesses with crippling debt, money lending would be in the hands of the state. Under a state monopoly on finance, credit would be granted not so bankers can make money, but based on what the local community and the country as a whole needed. Interest from state loans would go into the public treasury, paying for more public services, scientific research, technology, and construction. In this new America, healthcare facilities, from drug manufacturers to hospitals to local pediatricians' offices, would be under public control. Healthcare would be guaranteed to everyone as a basic human right, and drug prices would be set by central planners in order to ensure that they were affordable. The life and health of the American people would no longer be left in the hands of those who seek to make a profit, but would be in the hands of the community. Educating the youth would become a national priority, not a place for student loan sharks and charter school grant hustlers to make money. Our children would stop being cogs in a decaying educational machine and instead become a national priority, with every American understanding that it was their patriotic duty to make sure the kids of tomorrow would have a better life than we are having today. In the context of this new America, in which society was being organized according to a rational plan, you and the people in your community would get rich quite easily. Your opportunities would soar. The chances of you and your family moving ahead in the world would be astronomical. The standard of living would increase, and the kind of innovation and creativity displayed by Americans in the past would resurface stronger than ever before. This vision of a United States in which the population is unleashed to become prosperous, the hope of working hard to become wealthy, no longer restricted into the hands of a privileged few, has a name. It's called socialism. That's not what you thought socialism was. You thought socialism was raising your taxes. You thought socialism was a guy in a fur hat seizing your house and your car. You shouldn't be alone in thinking that. You wouldn't be alone in thinking that. Socialism has certainly been slandered and smeared. The kind of drastic transformation and rebirth of the country that I just described as a potential socialist vision for the United States is exactly what socialism did in Russia, in China, in Cuba, in Korea, in Venezuela, Vietnam, and in so many other parts of the world. Before 1917, Russia was an agrarian country led by a feudal czar. Edward Snowden. All right, writing it down. I'm reading the book. Yeah. Good, the German Communist Revolution. Okay. Revolution. Oh, okay. But by 1936, it was producing more steel than any other country in the world. When Stalin put the peoples of the Soviet Union into motion with his 5-year plans, the world's largest hydroelectrical power plant, the Dnieper Dam, was constructed soon afterwards. In just a few short years, the Soviet Union became a booming center of production, churning out more steel, more tractors, and constructing modern housing at a faster rate than any other country in the world. At that time, the rest of the planet was having a Great Depression. Roosevelt sent members of his administration to Moscow to directly observe the process. The Soviet Union's great construction projects were an inspiration for the Works Progress Administration, in which the Hoover Dam, the Key West Highway, LaGuardia Airport, and so many beautiful landmarks were built in the United States. China had no steel mills in 1949. Today, it produces half of the steel in the world in a state-controlled, centrally planned steel industry managed by the China Steel and Iron Association. China now has the largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world, Huawei. China has lifted 800 million of its people out of poverty and is building high-speed railways, stadiums, hydroelectrical power plants, water treatment facilities, and huge amounts of other necessities and modernizations all over the planet. In Africa, in Latin America, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe, the Chinese state-controlled machinery of production is humming along, laying the foundations, hoisting rails, and lighting up the night sky with electricity. And do you think this is making Chinese people poor? Are they being taxed into oblivion to pay for it? On the contrary, every day another Chinese person becomes a millionaire, and every week another Chinese billionaire is created. CNN even admits that Chinese people are getting wealthier every day. In the 1960s and 70s, China had many problems. All right, sandinistas. China had many problems. While the Soviet Union helped them build industries during the first years of the People's Republic, their falling out with the USSR led to a clique of sinister poverty worshippers who kept the country poor. Led to the rise of a clique of sinister poverty worshippers who kept the country poor. But the ultra-leftist clique known as the Gang of Four was swept away. With the rise of Deng Xiaoping, the state-run economy swung into motion. Deng Xiaoping said words that every American should come to understand. Poverty is not socialism. To get rich is glorious. Yes, you've heard that communists and socialists want to abolish private property. However, serious Marxists and revolutionaries have always distinguished between personal property and private property. Your house, your car, anything you directly use is your personal property. Marxists have never opposed this. Private property referred to in Marxist texts is the massive centers of economic power, not used for personal happiness, but rather for the purpose of making profits. This private property, these means of production, clearly distinguished from personal property, should be forced to serve the public good and not allowed to function in ways that are detrimental to the community. You've heard that under communism, the government owns everything. Well, go to any country run by a communist party, be it Cuba, China, or Vietnam, and you will see all kinds of private hotels, hi to you, T-Mac, restaurants, tech firms, and online retailers. The Sandinistas of Nicaragua have enabled thousands of people to launch their co-ops and businesses. The Venezuelan government subsidizes and promotes all kinds of independent firms and stores. What makes this different from capitalism? They all function alongside a huge state-controlled manufacturing and infrastructure apparatus. The people have control of the natural resources, the major industries, and the lending of money. Profits are not in command, and human reason can dictate economic activity. The government puts forward a plan to raise the country out of poverty, and a tightly disciplined and organized population carries it out. However, within this state-controlled economy, in which human reason, not the irrationality of markets, dictates production, many people are enabled to become wealthy. Private hotels and tech firms, restaurants, farm cooperatives, clothing designers, and other endeavors are an essential wing of 21st century socialism. Not only does the government allow these things to exist, but it subsidizes and directs them. The socialist economy is like an orchestra. The big state-run industries, the government banks, the collective farms all play their role. The private sector and the independent entities play their role as well. However, at the end of the day, it is the 5-year plan of development set by representatives of the people that determines the country's overall direction and lays out the economic vision. This chorus of production and development is directed by human reason and political leaders, not profit-hungry, self-serving entities. Capitalism is a society based on profits. Only in capitalism can you have record profits for corporations like General Electric, Raytheon, Goldman Sachs, Chase Bank, and ExxonMobil, while the country falls into ruin. Socialism is when popular power and a government of strength forces the economy to work in the public interest, pushing aside those who would get in the way of a better life for the people. In capitalist countries, the rich and powerful corporations control the government and use it for their own ends. In the emerging socialist planned economies of the world, the private sector and those who work to make their own profits do so in cooperation with and in obedience to a popular revolutionary government. All right. Refuse fascism. In China and in the Islamic Republic of Iran, billionaires have actually received the death penalty in instances where they committed crimes against the public. No matter how wealthy the capitalists are, in a socialist planned economy, they are subservient to the state, a representative of the population that ensures their welfare and controls the major means of production. I'm sure this is not what you expected to read. You probably encountered someone who calls themselves a socialist or a communist or a leftist or an anarchist or some other label and told you something completely different than I am telling you right now. You probably came across radical leftists who said that you are the problem, not the billionaires destroying the country. They did not want to empower you, but rather wanted you to feel guilty. They didn't want you to become wealthier, but they wanted you to be poorer. Not surprisingly, you had little interest in aligning with this person and their ideology. This is not what genuine socialist politics is. The middle-class cultural left, made up of counterculture elements, is a conscious distortion of leftist politics. In 1949, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency began a program called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, intended to distort and control activism in the United States. The CIA funded Trotskyist magazines like Partisan Review. The CIA arranged for money to pour into the Institute for Policy Studies, which set up a network of carefully controlled activist groups. The Peace Corps, a supposedly humanitarian organization that cooperates with the CIA in gathering intelligence, was created and recruited idealistic young people to work in developing countries. There was just a super chat that went by. I think I missed it. What was it? I don't want to miss it. Can someone repeat it, please? I want to write it down. I want to get to the answer. I think it just went by and I missed it. I don't want to miss it. Someone please repeat the super chat. Oh, okay. I guess that was, okay. I guess I didn't miss it. All right. Okay. All right. We will continue. At the same time, the CIA was paying for, it was about Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay. Oswald. At the same time, the CIA was paying and controlling leftists and working to crush what remained of the strong Communist Party of the 1930s. It was experimenting with drugs, mysticism, and the occult. The CIA was actively engaging in experiments with hallucinogenic drugs and mind control, and began distributing drugs on college campuses. The program was called MK Ultra, and it became a matter of public record in the 1970s. The result was the creation of a synthetic left, distorted political creature that had nothing to do with the long history of American workers fighting for justice. For example, at this time, most of the funding for the environmental movement can be traced back to big oil companies. Prior to becoming a Marxist. Okay. All right. Via entities like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Fund, etc. These forces don't want to discover or harness new alternative energy. They just want to help craft laws around oil and natural gas extraction so they can maintain a monopoly and put their competitors in developing countries around the world out of business. The entities now known as the left may have been anti-war activists a long time ago, but today, whenever there is a CIA-funded George Soros color revolution, they are the first to cheer for it and promote it. When CIA operatives are funding terrorists and inciting chaos in independent countries, these supposedly peace-loving and egalitarian people are even louder in supporting the destabilization than the right wing is. CIA, FBI, drugs, and black hands. The so-called left work hard to promote and sell the war against Syria, and then they worked hard for the NATO intervention in Libya. Even the minority of ineffective leftists that don't openly cheer for CIA interventions are carefully controlled. The synthetic left has no future. A new entity, rooted in America's forgotten traditions of class struggle, must be forged in this key historical moment. Back when we had a strong communist party during the 1930s, it put out a very different message. It published books like Towards Soviet America, presenting a vision for a new USA under the control of a people's government. The Communist Party fed the unemployed and led them to fight for their conditions. It actually organized occupations of the National Mall by military veterans. This famous occupation in Washington, D.C., known as the Bonus March, was key in winning veterans' benefits. Membership of the Communist Party in the 1930s, they were not Soviet agents. They represented a tradition in American history William Jennings Bryan, the great populist leader, famously said his vision for the country was every man a king, but none shall wear a crown. Huey Long, the governor and senator of Louisiana during the Great Depression, adopted this slogan as well. Eugene Debs traveled the country in a bright red train car in 1912 and received almost 1 million votes in the presidential election. His message was a call for an American brand of socialism, and millions rallied around him in the streets and at the ballot box. The U.S. Pledge of Allegiance was written by a socialist, Francis Bellamy. Bellamy was an anti-racist Baptist minister who refused to preach in front of segregated congregations. Bellamy was eventually banned from the pulpit in Boston for his revolutionary, thank you, Justin, anti-capitalist sermons, championing the rights of the American people against the Wall Street class. Francis Bellamy's relative, Edward Bellamy, wrote a science fiction novel, Looking Backward, that told of a future socialist USA. The book was a bestseller back in the 1880s. The Communist Party of the 1930s was always one of the loudest voices against racism, but this was not simply liberal pandering. The Communist Party said that Black Americans constitute an oppressed nation within U.S. borders. The Communist Party supported Black nationalism and saw organizations like the Nation of Islam as legitimate representatives of a colonized people within the borders of the United States. The times in which we can judge politicians by what they say are over. The time has come to know them by their fruits and look for what is actually being achieved. Every election year, the new candidates say they will fix health care, improve education, no child left behind, make America great again, hope and change. We've heard these cheap promises before. But why don't these positive changes ever occur? Because change does not come from hollow promises. The rebirth of the United States will only come from action. Our politicians right now are weak, cowardly campaigners, pandering to the very forces that have destroyed our standard of living. We need a government made up of people that are fearless. We need a government in Washington, D.C., that is aligned with a coalition of American working families who are ready to swing into action and push aside all who would stand in the way of a better tomorrow for our community, our country, and our kids. Imagine a politician that is not afraid to walk into Wall Street boardrooms with federal marshals and say, "You have done nothing for our country. You have been enriching yourselves while America falls into ruin. The game is up. You are done. This corporation is now public property. You have been nationalized. See me in a few months about a compensation check if you are lucky." That is a government of strength. That is a government of action, and a government backed up by people's power. This is the kind of strength that we saw with our two greatest presidents, Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The reason that Abraham Lincoln was able to smash the Southern plantation system was because he had the weight of millions of people behind him. Marching behind Lincoln's banner was Harriet Tubman, the first woman to lead the U.S. soldiers into battle. Tubman led an army of freed slaves along the Combahee River in South Carolina, liberating plantations. Lincoln had the support of labor unions, and among his generals was August Willich, an open communist from Germany who corresponded with Karl Marx during the war. Roosevelt drew his strength from the industrial unions, the unemployed councils, the League Against War and Fascism, and other well-organized sections of the population who joined him in fighting for the people. Speaking to a mass rally in Madison Square Garden in 1936, Roosevelt proclaimed, "For 12 years, this nation was afflicted with hear nothing, see nothing, do nothing government. The nation looked to the government, but the government looked away. We had to struggle with the old enemies of peace, business and financial monopoly, speculation, reckless banking, class antagonism, sectionalism, and war profiteering. They had begun to consider the government of the United States as a mere appendage to their own affairs. Never before in all history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hatred for me, and I welcome their hatred. The socialist system that has become so powerful in China is called socialism with Chinese characteristics. It is a planned economy rooted in China's unique culture, history, and conditions. The moment has come for those of us who love our families, our communities, our country, and our world to begin developing socialism with American characteristics. The American people will never accept the importation of a Russian, Chinese, Korean, Venezuelan, or Cuban political system. So the socialism that will eventually take power in the United States will be one rooted in our own way of life. It will be a socialism that encourages individual initiative and allows human beings to unleash their creative potential. It will be a socialism that respects civil liberties and permits freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion. It will be a socialism that rejects racism, bigotry, and all forms of discrimination. It will be a socialism that respects the traditional family values, which many Americans hold dear. It will be a socialism that seeks to bring people up and enable them to bring themselves up, not one that celebrates tearing people down and destroying. The American socialism will be a socialism that promotes strength, not weakness, and seeks to maximize the potential of our population by combining our efforts for the good of the country and the world. If one studies American history, one concept that is very dear to our hearts is the concept of redemption. A very consistent theme in American history has been that of a great turnaround or a dramatic change of direction when it is absolutely needed. The most beloved American gospel song, Amazing Grace, was written by John Newton, a slave trader. Newton composed his still beloved religious anthem when he was determined to see that the practice of owning slaves and selling human beings violated human principles. Seeing that his life and his beliefs were wrong and leading him in an immoral direction, Newton turned his slave ship around in the middle of the Atlantic and returned to the USA, never again to be involved in chattel slavery. Americans still love this song, telling of how he once was lost but now am found. The tune was the primary hymn of a historic moment in America known as the Second Great Awakening. This moment of religious fervor left a huge impression on American society and culture. Mormonism, Seventh-day Adventism, tent revival meetings, and other religious practices in the USA can be traced back to this period. The Second Great Awakening was a key moment in establishing and strengthening the abolitionist movement, which culminated in the Second American Revolution and the crushing of the plantation system. Since the death of Roosevelt in 1945, the USA has been moving in a very dangerous direction. A huge propaganda campaign has worked to convince us that selfishness, greed, and a lack of solidarity and group identity are somehow part of who we are as Americans. Free market ideology has been so thoroughly inculcated among our population, and now our country is in a state of economic ruin. With infrastructure decaying, wages dropping, and our standard of living falling lower and lower, a thunderous political explosion is on the horizon. The moment is ripe for a new great awakening among the American people. The future of this country belongs to the youth, a number of whom have already rejected capitalism in favor of populism and socialism. Figures like Bernie Sanders have become more popular than ever, and the Occupy Wall Street protests of 2011 marked a turning point in the consciousness of the population. However, these sentiments remain only words. Minds are changing, but the march toward a low-wage police state continues. A tightly organized and strategically operating political movement must begin operating not simply to foment chaos in the streets, but to push for the creation of a real government of action that can oversee the country's rebirth and create a new America. The time for Americans to interact with politics as observers is over. The future of the country belongs to you, and it is time for us to move forward. And that is the introduction to my book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism, an oldie but a goodie. That's how I opened the book. And actually, you know, that opening little manifesto is, I mean, it's pretty loose, but I get into all kinds of stuff in here. I talk about, you know, the oil markets. I talk about Steve Bannon and economic nationalism and how he's wrong. I talk about the history of American populism. It's good stuff. I mean, this is an oldie but a goodie. You know, I put it out probably just after Trump was elected, if I'm not mistaken. Trying to look for the date that I put this out, but it doesn't seem to be in the book. But yeah, this was fun, and this book continues to sell years later. I mean, this is a popular book, so check it out if you haven't. I think a lot of you really liked that stump speech opening. I mean, it's similar to a speech I gave in New York City called American Socialist Awakening. But this opening essay, this opening introduction is quite beloved by many people. So check it out. I'm probably going to cut it and make it a video on its own. But I thought that was how I would open the live today, as I would open by reciting the introduction to my book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism. I thought that would be fun. So there we go. That was a great way to open us up here. So now I'm going to drink some water instead of diet beverage. And I think we'll do our roll call. Who's with us today? Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Who's with us today? Names and locations. Names and locations. Kinky says she was in Philly as cities began closing up in March. Los Angeles, Orlando, Florida, Cleveland, Pirate Alex, Albany, New York, Lawrence Chu, Phoenix, Arizona, Kennedy, Mount Doom, Iceland, Queens, New York, Bennett Lloyd, Edinburgh, Scotland, Los Angeles, San Jose, Mitt Romney, Atlantic City, Germany, Pennsylvania, Vienna. Greetings from the Hungarian People's Republic, Mohsen from Iran, Germany, Dante from SoCal, Richmond, Virginia, Joe Gale in Nassau County, New York, New Jersey, Frankfurt, East Germany, Pakistan, Texas, Arlington, Virginia, Ireland, wow, names and locations, folks, Leipzig, Germany, Nepal, Bill Preston in the United States, North Macedonia, from hell, just like Jack the Ripper, Lagos, Nigeria, Earth, says Jerry, Romania, London, Mo in Pomona, California, PRC, People's Republic of China, Northern California, Palo Round Mountain, California, Kendall from San Diego, Belgium, His Holiness from Iceland, Heartland, Missouri. Very, very good. Very, very good. Who else is with us? Julian, Southeast UK, Free Assange. Free Assange, very good. Very good. I agree with that. Narnia. Trinidad, Texas, Washington, D.C., Long Island, New York, sending love, my hometown, Puerto Rico. Greetings from sunny Florida, says Harold Sullivan, Wilmington, California. Salt John, Richport, I don't know where that is, but, or St. John, Richport. Okay, very good, very, very good. Who else is with us today? Who else is with us? Just want to give everyone the shout out that they are owed. Albuquerque, Greece. Greece is the word, right? Who else is with us? Salt Lake City, I am Sudan. Croatia, Maine, USA. Free Julian and Mumia, says Anthony Reyes. We need out of the Bernie. Well, I don't know what that means. Sweden, Rising Tide Red is in Sweden. Welcome, welcome, welcome. These earlier lives are better for European folks, right? Can you get stuck in the past? Yes, you can get stuck in the past. David Schaff from Alaska. Aberdeen in Scotland. Phoenix, Arizona. Nick Name. right? Zen, Cincinnati, Ohio. Tankytown, somewhere. Who else is with us today? Hello from Croatia, Munich. Dennis Fowler is in Munich. Ghana. You know, you should know that every time I scratch my nose, it's a secret sign to the Illuminati, right? It's like there's a certain like code that I do where I like scratch my. I'm just kidding. Just kidding, folks. Just kidding. Joanne in the Netherlands, Papua New Guinea, right? Middle of a Midwest cornfield, says A. Mayers. Okay. Well, you're social distancing there in the middle of the field. That's good. What else? Who else is here? Who else is with us? I want everyone to get their shout out. Welcome, welcome, folks. If you haven't already tweeted this out, now is the time to do it. Now is the time to do it. Pennsylvania, Will DeMarco, what do you think of all the countries in the continents of the Americas having a demilitarized borders, not open borders, but humanitarian immigration? I'd be open to that. Write that down. Alrighty. All right, so let's start going through these super chats. Edward Snowden. As far as I can tell, Edward Snowden is a young libertarian Ron Paul supporter who was working for a company that was contracted by the NSA. He didn't like what they were doing, and he ran away to Russia. Galloway leaving London, the crime and fear that's driving people out of big cities. Okay. I mean, as far as I can tell, Edward Snowden was an NSA guy who didn't like what he was doing. And the thing is, you have to remember that the government apparatus has people in it. People have opinions, right? They can't all be robots, right? They would like to make sure that everyone just does, but there are many instances of the government doing things and people within the government apparatus not liking it. There's a whole history of people within the State Department who are anti-Israel. They call the Arabists. I'll never forget the day when I was protesting in Washington, D.C. against the proposal that Obama bomb Syria. And a woman walked up to me and told me she was an Arab translator for the FBI and that she agreed with us because these anti-Assad protesters, she translates what they say and they say kill Christians and stuff like that. So, the government is made up of people. I think Tulsi Gabbard, as a candidate for president, probably represented a deep layer within the Pentagon that don't agree with U.S. foreign policy. And actually, I talk about that a great deal in my book. Why was Tulsi Gabbard going after Kamala Harris? Why did Joe Biden go at the last moment to pick Kamala Harris? You have to check out the new book on Kamala Harris. It's available on Amazon. It's out. Good stuff. But yeah, I don't think Edward Snowden is a vast conspiracy. That said, maybe there are other people that agree with him and have protected him and enabled him to get where he is. Maybe not. I have no way of knowing that. Is it possible that there was a wider layer of people that helped Edward Snowden to escape to Russia? Is it possible that there are deeper layers within the government that were on his side? We don't know. Now, was it possible that they strategically allowed Edward Snowden to flee to Russia? He didn't know that they were doing that. Is it possible that they thought, okay, well, let's make it public that we can spy on everybody. Let's let this guy do what he's going to do. Is that possible? They were watching him and said, okay, let him do his thing. Is that possible? We don't really know. We do know, however, that Edward Snowden is now in Russia and faces all kinds of criminal charges in the United States and had revealed a huge amount of the activities of the National Security Agency and their surveillance in the United States. All right. Communist revolution in Germany in the 1930s. Was it possible? Well, here's the thing. I maintain, and I have studied the Weimar Republic extensively. There is so little written about it, right? It's so weird. I tell people, and you've probably heard me say it before, so forgive me if you're a regular here. Must be said, right? In New York City, we have the biggest bookstore in the world. It's called Strand Books. It is thank you, Justin. It is the largest bookstore in the entire world. It's called Strand Books. And if you go to their German history section, they have every book you would ever want to read about Hitler. They have Hitler's dog, the biography. They have Hitler's niece, the biography. They have Hitler's mother, Hitler's dad, Hitler's cousin. You know, Hitler's hunting and fishing. I mean, he didn't hunt or fish, but you know what I'm saying. They have every possible intricate book on Hitler. They shouldn't call it the German history section. They should call it the Hitler section, because that's all it is. It's just Hitler. But look for one book there on the Weimar Republic. You'll find one, maybe two, maybe three. There's very little history written about the Weimar Republic. Everybody knows all about Hitler. Everyone knows all about Hitler, but the 1920s in Germany and what happened there, people don't know much about. Now, I read about a lot of this stuff, and I have some, I might even have them here. I have a lot of books on it I purchased. There was a History of the German Republic, which is a very good book. I have a book called, there's a study called, I think it was called, what was it called? You know, Red Days in Berlin, something like that. There's a lot of histories of the Weimar Republic and the fighting that went on in the lead up to Hitler's seizure of power. But they don't get wide circulation. And what happened was this, okay? I maintain that really what secured the rise of Hitler in Germany was the events of 1918. And I maintain that. And that many people who want to ramble on about the rise of Hitler, especially now, you get this talking point, well, you know, we have to vote for Biden. Look, in Germany, the communists didn't vote for the Social Democrats or something. End of homesteading. Okay. Here's the thing. In 1918, at the end of World War I, you know, the Germans had already lost the war, basically. The German Kaiser ordered the German Navy to do like a suicide mission. And they refused to do it. They shot their officers, and pretty soon the revolution spread all through Germany. Workers who didn't want to fight in World War I anymore, and they saw that Germany was losing the war anyway, they rose up, and there was a revolution, and a government was declared, a government of workers and soldiers' deputies. Most of the governments that sprung up, most of the workers' councils were led by either members of the Social Democratic Party or the Independent Social Democratic Party, and this was a widespread revolution in Germany. You had the Kaiser stepping down, you had the German government collapsing, and socialists taking power in Germany at the end of World War I. Nobody ever talks about that, but that's what happened, right? World War I ended with a workers' revolution, and the leaders of the Social Democratic Party betrayed that revolution, right? Then a new government came into existence, workers' councils were everywhere, and the main Marxist party in the world, the biggest Marxist party in the world, the German Social Democratic Party, right? You ever read Marx's Critique of the Goethe Program? Well, the Goethe Program was the founding of the Social Democratic Party of Germany. So the biggest Marxist party in the world leads a revolution at the end of World War I. Right? Now, that party had already betrayed the German workers by supporting World War I, but then on top of that, you know, it leads a revolution. So a revolution happens in Germany at the end of World War I, and the government is overthrown, so they're going to write a new constitution for the country. And what happens? Well, the Social Democrats wrote a capitalist constitution. They did not seize the moment and create socialism in Germany. And for a little while, Bavaria, all right, the Roman Catholic region, it's one of the more lower income regions of Germany. It's more working class, and it's Roman Catholic. It's where Hitler comes from, actually. Bavaria even seceded from the rest of Germany and called itself the Bavarian Soviet Republic. And in all parts of the country, there were uprisings. But the Social Democrats and the leaders of the mass Social Democratic Party, they ultimately sold out the revolution, and they created the Weimar Constitution, the Weimar Republic, which was not a Marxist government. And Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, who were two communists, they led an uprising with what was called the Spartacus Bund, which was like their communist group, the Spartacus League, the Spartacus Bund. They led an uprising, and the Social Democrats killed them. And Germany had a Marxist revolution. Book about it. Please recommend a book about the controlled demolition tactic. Okay. They led a Marxist revolution, and that Marxist revolution did not create socialism. And that moment where, the German people had been through World War I, in which millions of people died, they had been through all this horror, and they'd finally had a Marxist revolution, and the Marxist revolution did not create socialism. That was kind of the nail in the coffin of Marxism, right? Now, during the 1920s, there were multiple communist uprisings. There were multiple attempted right-wing military coups also. Throughout the 1920s, there was a huge amount of instability in Germany. And there were two left-wing parties. The Social Democratic Party, the SDP, denounced the Soviet Union. It was led by Karl Kautsky. They denounced the Soviet Union. They declared the Soviet Union was a red terrorist dictatorship, and they opposed it. And they represented factory workers. People who worked in factories and had industrial unions tended to be in the Social Democratic Party. And the Communist Party became the party of the unemployed Germans. They became the party of very desperately poor and hungry unemployed Germans. And they hated each other, right? They tried to have a united front for a while, but it wasn't going to work because the German Social Democratic Party they were very much the ruling party in many cities. In Berlin and elsewhere, they were the ruling party. They were the party of factory workers and industrial unions. And when communists would go out to march for the rights of the unemployed, police officers that were members of the Social Democratic Party, who actually wore their red communist pin or Social Democratic pins, would go out and shoot down workers, in the Communist Party that were protesting, right? So there was a blood feud between the Social Democratic Party and the Communist Party that was very, very deep, very, very deep. The Communist Party really was never able to gain any strength among the factory workers. And that probably motivated the Communist Party to be more ultra-left. Can take a lot bigger risks than people that have a job in a factory. If you have a job in a factory, you don't want to get fired. You want to follow the rules. You don't want to go to jail. You'll lose your job. Factory workers have a lot more to lose. So the Social Democratic Party became more and more reformist, right? Meanwhile, the Communist Party, because it was a party of unemployed people that are hungry and starving and want to go out and riot, it became more and more ultra-left. People want to blame that on Stalin or whatever. I mean, it had a lot to do with material conditions, right? Imperialists using religion and TV evangelicals to brainwash people in Oklahoma. All right, TV evangelicals. Brainwashing. Oklahoma. All right. The Communist Party, being the party of the unemployed, became much more a party of going out and rioting. They used to have the bread riots where the Communist Party would break store windows and for the unemployed. And they had this group called the Red Front Fighters League, which was like their militia. It was their communist militia that would sit on the rooftop and shoot police with guns. And they were very, very ultra-left. I think that the German Communist Party in the 1920s was pretty ultra-left. Whereas the Social Democratic Party became more and more reformist. It became increasingly a very, very anti-communist party, very much a party of the status quo. And the Weimar government in Germany, things kept getting worse, right? They were not addressing the problem of mass unemployment. People were hungry. People were starving. Things were getting worse and worse and worse. Meanwhile, the right wing was gaining strength, right? And the Weimar Republic in Germany, it had a lot of socialists elected, right? There were a lot of people who were Marxists and socialists that were elected, but really didn't do anything. And socialism became synonymous with the status quo. The Communist Party was the party of rioting, desperately poor, unemployed people. And the Social Democratic Party was the party of factory workers and government officials. It was like half the government, elected government officials, who were presiding over things getting worse and worse. They would give socialist and Marxist speeches, but things would get worse and worse and worse. So that was the conditions of Weimar Germany. A big event that happened was in 1929. There was what was called the Red May, or the uprising in the city of Wedding. Wedding is a sub-district of Berlin called Wedding. And the Communist Party announced that they were going to have an armed march on May Day. On May 1st, they were going to have an armed parade. Well, there was a ban on armed parades. You're not allowed to march, with guns in the Weimar Republic. They said, we're going to march with guns on May 1st. So they put up posters everywhere announcing they were going to do this illegal thing. They were going to have an armed parade through the streets of Wedding, the Wedding district of Berlin. they had their armed parade. We don't know who shot first, the police or the communists, but there was a gunfight started, and then for the next couple weeks in Berlin, there was an armed uprising in which about, I think, at least 1,000 people died. It was very, very bloody. In the vetting district of Berlin. And that event, in which thousands of people died, it was not an uprising that had a chance of winning. Okay, the Social Democrats didn't support it. Most of the unions didn't support it. You think Ahmadinejad? Okay. Most of the unions didn't support it. It had no chance of winning. It was very much. Thank you for the super chat. Was very much, very, very much an uprising that that didn't have a chance of winning, but was just kind of the Communist Party showing off how much strength it had and how many gunmen it had and how it was capable of making chaos in the country. Afterwards, there was a lot of demoralization. Because a lot of the people that had been supporters of the Communist Party were kind of like, okay, what did we just do there? There was no way we could have taken power. But you sent us out to go die, basically. I mean, it was the Communist Party decided to show off their strength, right? And you show their hand, right? Like, when you play poker, you show your hand. They wanted to show they had the ability to create utter chaos in the country. It was like a show of power. But a lot of people got killed in this kind of show of power that a lot of German communists felt was really unnecessary. And on top of that, the Nazi Party increasingly was recruiting among the unemployed as well. And the Nazi Party recruited among the unemployed. And after that uprising, in which thousands of people died in Berlin, the Nazi Party started getting a lot more government support because that uprising put the government on notice that, wow, the communists have the ability, they have armed groups, and they can cause violence and, they could bring us to a civil war if they wanted to. So a lot of the capitalists that were very reluctant to support the Nazi Party started giving the Nazi Party money. And actually the British intelligence also started giving a lot of money to the Nazi Party as a way to fight against the communists. And the main thing the communists did, their main strength, was unemployed people. They fed unemployed people. They organized bread riots among the unemployed. Well, the capitalists have a lot more money than the communists do. So the Nazis started doing the same thing. They started feeding the unemployed people and such. So they had more money in order to do it. Plus, many people after the 1929 uprising in Berlin felt like maybe the Communist Party, what was that about? They felt like it was not a strategic uprising and it put a lot of people's lives in danger unnecessarily. So that was kind of a turning point. Following the May 1st uprising in 1929, the Communist Party started to lose strength in Germany. Meanwhile, the Nazi Party started to gain allies among the ruling class. Many within the ruling class thought Hitler was a crazy right-wing fanatic. They thought he was just they actually said that this guy is he's an extremist of the right who was just as dangerous as the left, right? There's a story of when the Nazi Party flag was put on display. I forget who it was. Some wealthy German capitalist said, there's too much red on that flag. It reminded him of the communist flag. And they associated Hitler with chaos and with extremism. But when they saw that the communists had so much strength, they started giving more money to the Nazi Party. And I think that, it was the main reason that Hitler took power ultimately was 1918. The Marxist movement discredited itself in 1918. The fact that they could have a communist revolution after the end of World War I and still lose, right? They could wrench defeat out of the jaws of victory, right? It was like you could not lose that bad, right? It was like, how badly can you lose? What happened in 1918, where the Social Democratic Party, sold out the revolution, that pretty much guaranteed that a right-wing government was going to come to power in Germany. But yes, the big, the turning point where the communists started to really lose strength and the Nazis started to gain strength was the Red May uprising of 1929. But let's not forget that millions of German communists never gave up, and that even after Hitler came to power, there was a huge underground apparatus of German communists who got jobs in military factories and filled the shells and weapons up with made the weapons not work and sabotaged from within. And that even right up to the end, there was underground communist resistance in Nazi Germany. Ernst Thälmann, they kept him alive as a bargaining chip until the very end of the war when they shot him. That there's a whole history there, right? So let's not let's not assume, right, that that there's this narrative that Trotsky is responsible for, which says the German communists and the German social democrats hated each other too much. They didn't form a joint electoral ticket, so Hitler took power. That is a huge oversimplification. It's a huge oversimplification, and not everything in that narrative is necessarily true. For example, the slogan, after Hitler, us, or after Hitler, our day. I cannot find proof that the German Communist Party actually ever used that as a slogan. It's attributed to them by Trotsky. And is it possible that members of the party may have said this? But was that ever an official slogan of the German Communist Party? I have not seen the proof. Maybe it was. I'm not saying that it wasn't. I'm not saying Trotsky's lying because I have no proof that it wasn't. But I mean, just because Trotsky said it doesn't make it true. And furthermore, right, the German Social Democrats and the German communists hating each other wasn't just left sectarianism, right? It's not like liberals not voting for it's not like Bernie supporters not voting for Joe Biden. It was based on blood in the streets, okay? It was based on lots of killing and lots of dead bodies, right? It's one thing to not vote for someone because you disagree with them. It's another thing to not vote for somebody because they killed a bunch of people that you know, okay? You have to understand that, right? It's one thing, if you knew, you might not want to vote for Joe Biden now, right? I mean, I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden, but, I could be convinced. Somebody could convince me that Joe Biden was better than Trump. I'm not convinced yet. But if Joe Biden killed one of my relatives, if Joe Biden killed one of my comrades, if I saw someone dead in the streets and the killer had a Joe Biden button and was employed by the Joe Biden campaign, it would be far, far more difficult to convince me to vote for Joe Biden. That was the situation in Germany. And again, these people pushing this narrative don't exactly get that. The main thing is that I think, there's I don't know who that is. I don't know who this Eric character is, so I don't know. The main thing is that that the narrative that they all didn't, they didn't have a joint election, so therefore Hitler came to power. That is a huge oversimplification. All right, the Sandinistas. All right. They were a study circle in Nicaragua. They were students that were slightly more radical than the Communist Party of Nicaragua. They had a magazine called Issue 1, Volume 1. Issue 1, Volume 1 was the name of it, because every time it would be published, it would be outlawed, so they would have to give it a new name. They only ever had one issue come out because every time it was published, it was outlawed, and that was the Sandinistas, and they were a small student study group. But then there was an earthquake in Nicaragua, you'll remember, and a lot of people died. And the government, raised all kinds of money for relief in the earthquake, and the people never got the money. And government officials tied with the Somoza dictatorship of the United States siphoned off all the money and ripped people off, and that made people really mad at the government of Nicaragua. 1979, after I think 1 or 2 years of civil war, they took power. What's interesting is the Sandinistas originally, right, they were not the Communist Party. The Communist Party of Nicaragua, which was pro-Soviet, right, was considered by the CIA to be the main danger in Nicaragua. So actually, and this is wild, very, very wild, the CIA in early years of the Sandinistas actually gave them a little bit of money, assuming that they were anti-communists. And it was part of the Congress for Cultural Freedom program and stuff. They gave some CIA money to the Sandinistas early on. Pretty soon, they lost control of them. The Sandinistas, the FSLN, the Sandinista National Liberation Front, it's actually a merger of a number of groups. There was a Maoist group, there was a Christian Catholic liberation group, there was some more explicitly Marxist-Leninist groups. They all merged. The Sandinistas officially were a Roman Catholic political party, which is interesting. Most of the Marxist parties in the world in the 1970s were not religious at all. The Sandinistas were always Roman Catholic. They had Catholic priests that took office in the government, and they were Marxists, right? They were communists, but they mixed their communism with Marxism. They were never explicitly MLs. They were Christian socialists. They were Marxist influenced. They were communists within them, but they were broader than that. They got elected, and they fought a 10-year civil war, right? Ronald Reagan. Like Iran-Contra, where the U.S. government was covertly arming the Contras, this terrorist group that fought against the Sandinistas. It went on for 10 years. It was a big scandal because the U.S. Congress outlawed funding the Sandinistas, so it became a big scandal that Reagan, sold weapons to Iran and used the money to fund the Sandinistas. And there were other, you couldn't directly fund the Sandinistas, so there were other covert ways. Like, for example, a lot of right-wingers just donated to the Contras. That was a big thing. All over the country, the Contras in the United States would just have events, and right-wingers would give them money. The Moonies, the Unification Church, raised a lot of money for the Sandinistas. Russell Means from the American Indian movement raised a lot of money for the Sandinistas. I believe, never mind, but the Sandinistas were getting a lot of money, or not the Sandinistas, the Contras, the Contras, the anti-Sandinista fighters were getting a lot of money from the United States, even though the U.S. Congress officially outlawed it. The Contras would go into neighborhoods and they would burn healthcare clinics and behead people. They would execute literacy volunteers. They were murderers. They were also drug dealers. The Contras were drug dealers, and they were selling cocaine to the United States. That's where the CIA cocaine connection that was established. I mean, that's Gary Webb. They revealed that the Contras were being helped by the CIA at the same time they were selling cocaine and crack across the United States. They were just terrorists and thugs. What's interesting, so then ultimately in the 90s, in order to end the Civil War, the Sandinistas agreed to have an election. And they had an election, and they lost. They lost the election. The reason that they lost was that basically the U.S. government sent the message that to the population of Nicaragua, if you vote against the Sandinistas, we end the killing. And the population had seen bombs and terrorism and all kinds of things going on in the country. And the U.S. government said to them, hey, all this violence and terror we're unleashing on your population, it'll end if you vote against the Sandinistas. So they did. The Sandinistas lost in the 1990s. There was all kinds of austerity in Nicaragua, mass poverty, mass suffering, free market capitalism. But in 2006, the Sandinistas got elected again, and they took power again. Now, what's interesting is that in 2006, the Sandinistas changed their platform. It's really wild, right? In 2006, when the Sandinistas won the election again, right? They actually said that they didn't believe in socialism anymore. They said that we believe in capitalism, but we just believe in doing what's best for the country. And they told everyone they were liberals, but everyone knew they were the Sandinistas. But it was like their election campaign was kind of based on we're liberals. And they got a lot of capitalists in Nicaragua to support them, right? It's very fascinating. There were a lot of capitalists in Nicaragua who saw the country being economically devastated by neoliberalism and just hated the pro-U.S. party that was in power. And the Sandinistas toned down their platform to say, oh yeah, we believe in capitalism now. We just don't believe in, and just having the economy ruined. And so a lot of domestic capitalists in Nicaragua who had fought against the Sandinistas in the Civil War voted for them in 2006. They won the elections. Now, after 2006, they started getting a lot of financial support from China, financial support from Venezuela, and they changed their position again, and they moved back towards socialism. Now the Sandinistas are in power, and their actual slogan is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. And that's what you see on display all throughout Nicaragua. They have Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. The government, has a huge public budget. They hand out the money quite a bit, to help low-income Nicaraguans start their own businesses. They take care of those business owners who voted for them. See, it's interesting. They still maintain a lot of support for domestic capitalists, but the government is the biggest financial entity in the country, which I think is fascinating. But it's a lot like China, right? Nicaragua is a lot like China. It's a lot like Venezuela. Where you have a big market sector, but the state has the power. The government has the majority of the money. The government plans the economy, but there's a lot of private businesses and such. And that's Nicaragua. And for a while, Nicaragua was planning to build a canal that would be an alternative to the Panama Canal. That would be like it was going to be a canal made by a Chinese company that would be an alternative to the Panama Canal. It seems like the USA was able to crush that, and environmental agencies were able to stop that. But never say never. It still might happen. The Sandinistas are a fascinating story. But again, the Sandinistas were able to take power by not being dogmatic Marxists. If they had just followed, the old dogmatic way, if they had been quote-unquote anti-revisionists, if they had followed the one true Marxist way, they never would have taken power. They figured out Nicaragua's conditions. They maneuvered. Let's remember, early on, they got CIA funding. Then they were able to, one thing led to another. That's how revolutions are. It's a series of alliances. It's a series of coordinated moves. It's never being dogmatic. Okay. And the Sandinistas are a fascinating story, I think. It's really fascinating. And they're still in power. And Nicaragua's economy is far better than Guatemala's economy, far better than Honduras's economy, far better than the economy of Belize, right? Compared to the capitalist countries of Central America, Nicaragua's doing pretty darn well, right? Illiteracy has been wiped out. They have free health care for the population. They have problems with corruption, no doubt about it, but they've done pretty well. All right, okay. Sandinistas. All right, refuse fascism, Revcom. Well, refuse fascism, it's I shouldn't say a front group. That's what the right wing. It's a front group. It's not a front group. Okay, it's an organization started by the Revolutionary Communist Party, and it fits a whole pattern. When Nixon was president, before the Revolutionary Communist Party got started, they had a group that they called it was called the Revolutionary Union. They were Maoists. They eventually formed the Revolutionary Communist Party. But the Revolutionary Union wanted to impeach Richard Nixon, so they formed an organization called the Workers' Committee to Throw the Bum Out. And they had rallies calling for Nixon's impeachment. In the 80s, the Revolutionary Communist Party really worked very, very hard to try and work against Ronald Reagan. So they had an organization called No Business as Usual that protested against nuclear power and against nuclear war and was anti-Ronald Reagan. Then, during the Bush years, they had the World Can't Wait, Drive Out the Bush Regime, that had big rallies against Bush and against the Bush regime, calling for Bush's impeachment. So now they have Refuse Fascism, and that is their effort to impeach Donald Trump. And honestly, I don't agree with a large amount of what Refuse Fascism puts out. They're into this kind of alarmism, right? This idea that if Trump is not defeated, everything's going to go to hell, and they're aligning. They had the one thing that shocked me is refusefascism.org had a rally to support James Comey. When the FBI director, James Comey, was fired, they had a rally to support him. Well, that's ridiculous. And again, Donald Trump is from the right. He's challenging the establishment from the right. I'm not for that. But this idea that, the RCP, their orientation really since the early 80s has been that the majority of the American working class is what they call bourgeoisified. So they believe that the quote-unquote lumpen proletariat, which is low-income people of color, which they consider to be the lumpen proletariat, which I don't think fits Marx's definition, but that's what they think. But only the lumpen proletariat is revolutionary. But they want to recruit and recruit and neutralize certain middle-class elements that are against the system as well. So, they protest police brutality, and they try to mobilize the lumpen proletariat. At least the RCP is visible. Well, that's a good point, yeah. And then they form anti-Republican groups to try and mobilize the middle class and neutralize middle-class elements. They believe the revolution will be made by the poorest of the poor, the lumpen proletariat, and the middle class. They believe that the broad masses of American workers and their millions are hopeless, reactionary conservatives. That's their viewpoint. And I don't agree with them. And in a lot of ways, the RCP, you look at a lot of their material, and they say very, very little about economics. Wages, the economy, they don't care about that, right? Ask them about overproduction, crisis of capitalism. They have no clue about that. Even their economist guy, Raymond Lotta, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know about any of it. Their analysis is pretty much the system is bad and it's all about the state. It's about state repression. And once they come to power, they'll use force to make everything better. It's very much an ultra-leftist grouping. I compare them to Louis-Auguste Blanqui. And the Blanquyites, the Blanqui, formation that Marx and Engels were very critical of. In the 70s, they were trying to be a mass communist party that was aligned with China. They went into factories, they had working class organizations, but, the new communist movement is a tragedy. That's who they are, and they organized demonstrations to drive out the Bush regime. Now they want to drive out Donald Trump. And I don't agree with them. That's who they are. And they've been around a long time. The group very much has a cult of personality around Bob Avakian, who is their leader. He's an Armenian American. He's the son of a prominent judge in Berkeley, California, in the Bay Area. And that's what they are. Whatever. That's who the group is. And if you look at their material from the 70s, it's much more to the point. It's much more Marxist. It's much more class struggle oriented. You look at their material recently, years ago, they called themselves Marxist, Leninist, Maoists. I think they would still probably call themselves that, but they'll say that their leader, Bob Avakian, is, he's above Marx, Lenin, and Mao. He's got this higher version, the new communism. Some people look at their literature and see, like, they've got a book, The New Communism by Bob Avakian, and it's got a big earth on the cover, and people say they almost look like the Church of Scientology or something. So there you go. Hope you have a great day. Thanks for all the education. Well, thank you, Adam. I'm doing the best I can. All right. Was Lee Harvey Oswald a CIA operative? No. I mean, not that I know of. I mean, you never know. I mean, it's possible, right? I mean, you never want to say never, but I have no evidence of that. There are some. Again, don't say things that you do not know. If you don't know it, don't say it. Speculate, ask questions, but don't say things that you do not know. Don't say things that are true that you do not know, because that discredits you. If you can't prove what you say, don't say it. Okay, and as far as Lee Harvey Oswald, right? Very strange story, right? He's an American, quirky, weird guy, always reading books about communism. He's in the U.S. military, and he defects to the Soviet Union. He walks across the border, goes to the Soviet Union, basically. In the Soviet Union, they say, we don't want you here. Can you please leave? So he goes into his hotel and tries to commit suicide. They see him killing himself and say, okay, if you really want to stay here that bad, we'll let you stay here. He works in a factory. I don't want to talk about that. They can speak for themselves. But he works in a factory for a bunch of years in the Soviet Union, gets tired of the Soviet Union, comes back to the United States, which is very weird because if you go AWOL for that long, you defect to the Soviet Union, you're going to face penalties. Doesn't seem to face any penalties. He's in Louisiana. He joins the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. He's handing out leaflets for them with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, probably with Ted Cruz's dad, which is hilarious. I mean, it means nothing, but it's funny. Ted Cruz's dad was a Cuban American who was hanging out with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee at that point. Ted Cruz's dad later became a right-winger, but at that point, Ted Cruz's dad was hanging out with this group called the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which was started by the U.S. SWP, the Socialist Workers' Party, and they were pro-Cuba. And he's hanging out with them, and he's handing out leaflets, and he gets arrested, I think, for handing out leaflets. He's on local TV. They're interviewing him in Louisiana, and they say, are you a communist? And he says, well, no, I'm not a communist, but I'm a Marxist, and gives this weird, incoherent, he's a weirdo, right? I mean, the guy had some mental problems, I think. He was psychologically disturbed. If you're going to kill yourself and try to kill yourself in a Soviet hotel, I think that's a sign that you're not well. If anyone is suicidal, they should immediately seek mental health, help from a mental health professional. He's not well. The question is, did somebody else use him? That's the question. We don't know, right? That's it. We don't know. I mean, I don't think if anyone used him, it would have been the CIA, because the CIA was advocating soft power, and that in many ways the opposition to Kennedy was largely based on the fact that Kennedy was not escalating the military-industrial complex. Kennedy argued that the way to fight against communists was by raising living standards in developing countries, stabilizing countries. He worked with Park Chung-hee and the South Korean regime to try and stabilize it. He worked with the Shah of Iran, and that Kennedy was very much, I'll mail it to you, I'm not going to do that. Kennedy was very much, he was about soft power. He created the Peace Corps, which was a big CIA front, and was key in gathering information for the CIA. Kennedy seemed quite friendly to the CIA, so I really doubt the CIA killed Kennedy. If anyone killed Kennedy, if there was a wider conspiracy, my suspicion would be that it came from the military-industrial complex that wanted to escalate the Vietnam War and such. But there you go. I mean, we don't know that, right? I mean, we really don't know that. We don't know, right? We shouldn't say what we don't know, and we don't know. We don't know. Kennedy was widely hated by the military-industrial complex. That seems to be true. So if there was a wider conspiracy to kill Kennedy, I suspect that's where it came from. I don't think it came from. I don't think that it came from the CIA. But there's also, let's remember, there's a history of factions within the CIA that disagree with the rest of the agency. Let's not forget, right? The Bush family, Gina Haspel. Mike Pompeo, they come out of the CIA, but they tend to have a more right-wing militarist perspective that's out of line with what the rest of the agency thinks, right? There's that current within the CIA that the Bush family and Gina Haspel and Mike Pompeo come out of, and that's a faction that doesn't see things the way the rest of the agency does. Most of the CIA is in line with, Marilyn Ferguson and the Aquarian conspiracy and, soft power and, hippies and research. The CIA tends to be more of a liberal agency. But, there are other factions as well. So whatever. All right. All right. Neither poverty nor wealth, modesty. Well, the thing is that poverty is a relative term, okay? Extravagance, there's something to be said for opposing that, right? When people own 100 Mercedes or something, right? Like over extravagant behavior can be morally condemned, right? There's no reason for someone to have 50 huge displays of wealth that are awful, right? And you talk about the ancient Romans, right? How they used to have parties where they would stuff their faces full of food, and then they would have a servant shove a feather down their throat and barf it all up again, and then they would go and stuff their faces again. That's not right? It's wasteful, right? And that I am all for critiquing extravagance, but you have to remember, compared to 50 years ago, we're all very, very wealthy. Right? Compared to 100 years ago, we're all very, very wealthy. The nature of man, the nature of humanity, is to increase its living standards, increase the level of comfort in life, become more comfortable and more stable and more prosperous. That is the nature of humanity. So, it's not a matter of opposing wealth. I think there is a moral critique of unnecessary extravagance, right? Gluttony, things like that. So, but no, I want people to be as comfortable as possible. I want people to have as much security in their life as possible. That is the nature of mankind. We're always striving for a higher state of being. That said, there's no reason for unnecessary extravagance, I think. I think that there's a moral critique of that. All right, CIA, FBI, drugs, and black communities. Well, the main revelation is Gary Webb revealed that it was a fact that the CIA was connected with the drug trade, with the Contras in Nicaragua. We also know the paramilitaries in Colombia were involved in the drug trade, and that at the same time there was a huge explosion of drug addiction in the black community in the United States. There was the crack epidemic they talked about. That was the height of U.S. covert support for the Contras against the Sandinistas and the paramilitaries in Colombia against the FARC. And both of those groups were involved in the drug trade. Gary Webb kind of documented more of that and was destroyed. Read about what happened to Gary Webb, the journalist. That was pretty awful. So, yeah, there you go. Yeah, so, beyond that, if you want to get into specifics about that, right? I'm not going to get into specifics. I'll say what we know. We do know that in the 1980s, the CIA was funding the Contras to fight the Sandinistas, and they were involved in shipping cocaine and crack in the United States. We also know the CIA and the U.S. government was covertly supporting paramilitary forces in Colombia that were fighting the FARC rebels, and that they also were involved in the drug trade. That we know, okay? Beyond that, you want to talk about a wider scheme and all that, we don't know that. There's a great documentary that HBO ran called Bastards of the Party, that talked about the CIA drug connection and the war on the Black Panthers. Check it out. Humanitarian immigration. I'm open to that. If all the countries of North and Central and South America were to have fluid borders, I'm open to that. There's strong arguments in favor of that. I'm open to it. I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but that's different than saying open borders, right? That's a real policy, what you propose there, right? Let's demilitarize our borders. We'd still have borders, but we'd let anyone go through, kind of like the European Union. Might be something to that, maybe not, right? I don't know, right? We would obviously have to have an extradition agreement then with every country, right? So that somebody couldn't just break the law and run away. Right? We would have to, it would be like setting up a European Union. I'm not sure it would necessarily be a good thing. It may be a very bad idea, maybe a good idea. I'm open to that. That's different. But if you just shout, open borders now, and if you disagree with me, you're a big fat racist, well, most people look at you like you're nuts. Open borders means no customs. Everyone just walks across. Well, no, you need to have customs But should we loosen up our immigration policy? I tend to think so. Yeah, I tend to favor a loosening up of immigration policy. I think that what ICE is doing is horrendous. It's a huge gift to MS-13 and the drug cartels and the human traffickers. And, what Trump is doing around immigration is completely awful. But just shouting open borders now, and if anyone disagrees with me, they're a big fat racist. I mean, that's the woke left drives me nuts because they expect you to be stupid. They think that slogans are the answer to problems, and that they basically they bully and attack anyone who actually thinks seriously about politics, right? And they drive me crazy. The woke left absolutely drives me crazy, right? Open borders now is not sensible policy. Sensible policy. You proposed a sensible policy there. You said, let's be like the EU. Maybe that's a good idea. That's a policy I'll debate. Shouting open borders now is not a sensible policy. And then the response, if I don't agree with that, you're racist, you're a fascist. No, I'm not. I'm telling you that's not a sensible policy, right? But it's like, it's emotion, 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 Twitter mobs, and it's childish and it's not constructive. And this is a result of decades of distortion of leftist politics, right? You really ought to read, Sigmund Freud. He wrote a very good book, which I disagree with hugely. I largely disagree with, but it's good. It's very insightful. And I quote it extensively in the Kamala Harris book, where Sigmund Freud talks about the releasing of impulses and how we're constantly renegotiating the restraint on impulses, right? Society restrains our impulses, and yeah, I mean, the woke crowd are not interested in actual policy. They're not interested in actual Marxism. And you better agree with them or else you're a racist. And that never convinces anyone of anything. And I'm sorry. The woke crowd drives me crazy, right? Actual leftism I agree with. I am not a Trump supporter at all. I do not agree with Donald Trump and his policies. Okay. Crime and fear driving people out of big cities. Well, I think the main thing driving people out of big cities is all the fun stuff that's associated with being in a big city you can't do here, right? I mean, I live in a big city. I'm here in Brooklyn in my neighborhood. But, I love New York City. I can't imagine living anywhere else. But honestly, the past few months haven't been that different than living back in Ohio. I can't go to a show. I can't go to an event. All the great things about living in New York City have been turned off for the past few months. So, even the subways, right? I don't drive. I never have had a driver's license. And, being able to just go wherever I want on the subways is very important. Well, the subways are turned off. So if I want to go someplace, I got to take Uber. Well, they're not turned off. I'm sorry, but they're encouraging you. And my office and people I work with are basically encouraging me not to take the subways because it's, considered to be contaminated and such. And they're on, right? You can take them if you have to. So the subway's not working, right? That was one of the major appeals of New York. Plus, being able to go places has been turned off. I think that's the major reason people are leaving the cities, right? I think that what has happened is that gentrification has very much been about transforming the cities, not from being places where masses of people live and work, to being kind of playgrounds for rich kids, right? That's what Williamsburg is. That's what, the gentrified neighborhoods in urban centers tend to be, right? There's all those hipster bars and all of that. And, now you can't do any of that. So why be there? Why be here? Now, as far as the crime, I think that the main thing driving the crime, honestly, it's not defunding the police, because most of the defunding of the police hasn't gone through yet. I think the main thing driving crime is just that people have too much time on their hands, right? They can't do anything else, especially high school kids that are sitting around. It's like, okay, I'm sitting around my house. Maybe I'll go outside and break some shit. It's like when people are bored and sitting around, they do stuff they wouldn't normally do. And I think that's probably the primary thing driving crime right now, is just that people are bored. Plus, a lot of businesses are closed, right? If they were open, there'd be a store manager there who would call the police. Well, if no one's there, you can break in and take stuff. I think that the rise in crime right now is people are unemployed, and there's an economic component also, right? People are hungry, people are unemployed. Catholic Charities in Queens has a huge line out in front of it every day of people that are hungry. So it's economically driven on the one hand. Number two, people don't have anything to do. Number three, stuff isn't adequately guarded because so many things are closed. And this all adds to a factor. Crime in my neighborhood. I follow what's going on in my neighborhood. Yeah, we've seen an uptick. Yeah, I'm a little more scared to go out at night than I used to be. I'll still do it, right? But I keep my eyes out when I'm out there. But a lot of people are afraid to go out at night, a lot more than they used to be. And that's not good. This is all a bad situation. Very, very bad situation. I don't know what you mean by homesteading, person who asked the question. Controlled economic demolition questions. A great book on the controlled economic demolition would be Europe Since 1989 by Philip Thayer, where he goes over neoliberalism in Europe and how it impacted Europe and Europe's economy in the former Soviet Union and elsewhere. Great book. Confessions of an Economic Hitman is a masterpiece, classic, widely studied. I really like the book Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. Quite a bit of information in there. Yeah. All right. TV evangelicals brainwashing people in Oklahoma. Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? Okay. TV evangelicals brainwashing people, and I got to run here. I got two more of these, and then I got to run. TV evangelicals brainwashing people in Oklahoma. Well, here's the thing. I think that evangelical Christianity is a long story, right? I mean, that classical Christianity was kind of distorted. What we now call evangelical Christianity with the mega churches and the singing and the lights and the rock and roll music. That is very much, the result of, it's the result of, it is the result of an effort to kind of reinvent Christianity, utilizing, baby boomer aesthetics. And I've written a lot about this. But I think the main thing is that, if it's happening now, it's because people are at home. But I think that people need something to believe in. I think they need hope. And I think the anecdote to that would be a revolutionary message, right? If people have hope, the left puts out too pessimistic of a message. We need to give people optimism about socialism. We need an optimistic left. And if we could give people a revolutionary message that would really answer their questions, I think that would counter what the evangelicals are doing. And I'm sorry that that's happening out there in Oklahoma. All right, Ahmadinejad win the next election in Iran? Very likely. I think that Ahmadinejad could be re-elected as president of Iran, mainly because Rouhani, his entire selling point as president of Iran was that Ahmadinejad was a crazy radical, and he alienated America, but Rouhani was going to negotiate with America, and that was going to solve everything. Well, they negotiated with the United States. They gave up their peaceful nuclear energy program for the most part, and the United States stabbed them in the back and killed Qasem Soleimani. And the Iranian economy has gotten worse. So all of what Rouhani predicted and promised he would do has been destroyed. So it's very likely that, yes, hardliner elements in Iran are going to get stronger, primarily because of the fact that the Rouhani administration, their proposals have fallen apart. I think that's what Trump wants, honestly. That doesn't mean that the Iranian people don't have the right to elect a hardliner government. But honestly, Trump sees escalating with Iran, forming an Arab NATO, as a way to make lots of money selling weapons. Betsy DeVos, who is the brother of Eric Prince, she's his Secretary of Education. A lot of these private military contractors and weapons manufacturers like Trump, and they see an escalation with Iran in the Middle East as a way to make a lot of money. That a new Cold War in the Middle East, a new arms race in the Middle East would be a way to make a lot of money for a lot of people. And I think that that's what Trump is going for. So getting hardliner elements in, escalating Saudi hostility to Iran, escalating Israel's hostility, that's good for the Likud party. The Likud party always plays up the Iranian threat. I think that there's a lot of different things going on there. But yes, I think that at this point, the hardliners, the argument is on their side. Plus, as the Iranian economy gets worse, the hardliners tend to be more economically socialistic. They tend to believe in the more anti-capitalist principles of the Iranian Revolution. And so as people in Iran get poorer, they're going to want more guarantees on healthcare and education and things like that. And they're going to want more social programs, which the hardliners believe in. The moderates of Iran, the reformist movement, they are about free markets and they are about negotiating with the United States. Well, that didn't work out too well. So Ahmadinejad and the hardliners are about more social programs, more anti-capitalism, plus more anti-imperialism and more social conservatism, mind you. They're much more religious and conservative. And I think they're in the situation where they may become more popular. So that's the situation. All right, folks, we're going to wrap it off. We're going to cut it off here. It was a fun little surprise afternoon live. Folks, ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. I'm out. Best wishes.